America is a country of rebels, at once in love with the romance of freedom and fearful of its consequences. When the emotions of men and women ignite, order has a way of turning into chaos.
Legal does not mean desirable.
Their constitutional right of privacy.
Can't flaunt and mock God.
No one has the right to force me.
Who should make the decision, the government or a woman?
Without prayer, we wouldn't have our Constitution.
Who has the right to say which promises are sacred? Morality does not follow the letter of the law.
Against the will of God. You can give your child a father. The father of your child has decreed.
Hester Prynne was a threat to everything the Puritans of New England held dear: their law, their faith, their morality. She was a woman condemned.
The situation at the beginning of the Scarlet Letter is the exposure and shaming of a woman who has committed what to the Puritan society is considered a crime. She's a married woman who has been sent out to the colony without her husband, and in the 2-year interval between her arrival and the day that the story opens, she's conceived a child, obviously not her husband's child.
Hester is a remarkable character and an important character in a number of ways. She's important, I think, because she's the first American heroine. She's part of a tradition of heroines that you find in English literature with George Eliot, for instance, which is the sensuous and sensually alert woman who at the same time has a modesty and a sense of control and a sense of herself as a person.
Hester Prynne is sentenced to wear the letter A for her sin of adultery. Her long-lost husband, Roger Chillingworth, arrives in Boston just in time to witness his wife's humiliation. Hester's lover, the young minister Arthur Dimmesdale, remains silent about their affair, and the three characters begin a slow, tortuous dance of guilt, hypocrisy, and vengeance that ends in tragedy. The setting is 17th century Boston, a colony in the midst of wilderness. The uncivilized country the Puritans found themselves living in set the stage for the temptation of Hester Prynne. The Puritans had come to America to free themselves from the Church of England. They were pious Protestants, dedicated to the purification of their faith, and determined to settle colonies in the New World that would serve as models for the nation.
We mustn't think that they came to New England to establish religious freedom. They came to New England to establish a godly society according to their own lights. Their intention was to have the freedom to establish this godly society.
So they initiate a history of law versus conscientious objection, if I can put it that way. And that problem is still very, very much with us. I mean, we continue to have, at every point in our society, people who feel that they must conscientiously break the law, and those who feel that if the law is broken, society will go to pieces. That problem, I think, will never go away.
Nathaniel Hawthorne was Hester's creator, a man looking back at the Puritans from a Victorian viewpoint.
Hawthorne was writing in the 1840s at a time when what we now think of as women's liberation, whatever that means, but when the idea of the emancipation of women was very much around. And Hawthorne was sensitive to that, but on the other hand, he was very much a man of his period, and he still had to deal with a fundamental problem, which was he did not know quite what to do with his feelings about women.
For dramatic effect, Hawthorne made up a story about the source of the Scarlet Letter. He claimed his romance was based on a true history, which he discovered one day in a dusty corner of the Salem Custom House. Along with a manuscript, he said he found a ragged piece of cloth embroidered with the letter A.
My eyes fastened themselves upon the old Scarlet Letter and would not be turned aside. Certainly there was some deep meaning in it, most worthy of interpretation.
But the incident never happened. Hawthorne was writing a work of fiction, a story that has worked its way into American consciousness as a study of the eternal struggle between society and self, between loyalty and love.
It's a book about passion, deception, hypocrisy, trust, a book about the power of the society over the individual and the individual's obligation to society. All of those things, I think, will make it resonate down the corridors of time despite the changes in fashion, the changes in language, the changes in morality.
In 1926, actress Lillian Gish played Hester Prynne in the first screen adaptation of The Scarlet Letter. The silent movie star had to assure the board of worried Hollywood censors that the film would be in good taste before they gave their approval to the project. 76 years after it was written, the tale of sin and suffering was still making people squirm. In 1995, director Roland Joffe made another movie based on the classic.
All the issues in Scarlet Letter are totally alive. You know, women are still struggling, which in a world that, in all honesty, is not shaped in their best interests. We're caught in a conflict, let's face it, and I don't know whether there's an easy answer to this. On the one hand, we need order and we need balance to create a society, because we want to create a world that's stable enough for people to be able to survive in, and because you know, people want to live as much as they can a peaceful life. That's one side of it. The other side of it is we're all autonomous human beings. We have our own passionate natures, our own desires, our own need to create the world in our own mold.
Well into this century, The Scarlet Letter was one of the most frequently attacked books by American censors, and the name, Hester Prynne, has become synonymous with shame.
The most important character in the book is Hester Prynne. She is a strong and independent woman. The situation that begins the story is her conflict, you might say, between the image she presents of what she's done and the image that the Puritans have of what she has done. That is, from their perspective, she has committed a horrible crime, and from her perspective, it's not totally clear yet, but there seems to be some resistance on her part to accepting that designation.
Hester is forced to spend 3 hours on the scaffold so the townspeople can witness her disgrace.
She is created as a figure for other people to learn lessons from. They were trying to make her sin public. in the sense that the letter itself was a way for the community to never forget that sin.
Puritan communities were composed of male-dominated families, intolerant of disobedience and citizens who stepped outside the norm. Village law made no distinction between church and state. The Bible was the source for both spiritual and civil doctrine.
A standard way of summing it up is the 5 points of Calvinism, the Puritan theology, the sinfulness of all humankind, the foreknowing and foredooming of humans to heaven or to hell, the absolute sovereignty of God, the irresistibility of grace, the assurance that once you're saved, you're saved.
The heart of Puritan spirituality was simple: fervent prayer, religion without ceremony. When confronted with sin, the Puritans believed in making amends to God and society through repentance equal to the crime. If the sin was private, then only God need hear the confession. But public penitence was expected in cases like adultery. The Scarlet Letter marked Nathaniel Hawthorne's first real success as an author. He was born in 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts, where he and his 2 sisters grew up with their widowed mother. After college, Hawthorne spent nearly 12 years in isolation, mastering his writing.
Hawthorne was a complicated individual. He was very reserved, especially in adult life. But there's no question that there was a passionate heart and soul that lurked underneath.
Hawthorne married Sophia Peabody when he was 38. They moved to Concord, Massachusetts, where Hawthorne joined the transcendentalist movement of writers Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. When he ran out of money, Hawthorne returned to Salem and worked as a surveyor at the Salem Custom House. After he lost the job to political turnover, Hawthorne wrote The Scarlet Letter in 1850. It was applauded from the start as a literary classic, yet sold fewer than 8,000 copies during Hawthorne's lifetime.
The question why Hawthorne would have written about the Puritans in the 19th century is one that's quite compelling, because many people think he was a Puritan. Because why would you write about these awful people if you weren't one? And the answer to that is that in the 19th century, as indeed in the 20th century, these people have a special status in this nation. I mean, they are the guys who came over on the Mayflower and kind of took over our history.
Herman Melville thought that Hawthorne had a deep, dark secret that, if it were disclosed, would explain the meaning of all his work. That's one of several testimonies that we have from Hawthorne's life of people that knew him, who thought that there was a secret side that never was disclosed.
Hawthorne's ancestry also bound him to the Puritan past. His great-grandfather, John Hathorne, was a judge in the Salem witch trials of 1692.
For someone like Hawthorne, the issue of persecution, prosecution of women for witchcraft, I think, is a compelling theme, a fascinating theme. Hawthorne is reworking these themes that his ancestors worked. How do we think about women? You know, what do we allow women in our society? You know, do we really allow them the kind of independence of thought we as men claim for ourselves? I don't think Hawthorne was willing to go that far. But he's certainly struggling through a lot of the complications of those questions.
Adultery was only one of the many offenses the Puritans stigmatized with scarlet letters. The roster of punishments included various kinds of humiliation: a pillory, stocks, and whipping post were centrally located in nearly every New England village. Public penitence was common, but there were also more painful methods used, like branding. Because Hawthorne was trying to take his readers back to the 17th century, he wrote his dialogue in stiff, old-fashioned English. It made for difficult reading, but succeeded in evoking a sense of Puritan formality. After Hester's appearance on the scaffold, she and her child, Pearl, are taken to prison. Her husband arrives to confront his unfaithful wife.
Hester! Who is the man who has wronged us both?
Don't ask me. That you will never know.
Never, you say? Believe me, Hester, there be few things hidden from the man who devotes himself earnestly to the solution of a mystery. You may cover up this secret from the multitudes and the magistrates. I will seek this man. He will be mine.
You won't find him.
Never mind. I have a request from you, my former wife, which you cannot deny me. You have kept the name of your lover, so keep mine. You must tell no one that I was your husband.
All right. I will keep your secret as I have kept his.
Hester makes the promise to protect her lover, but in doing so, allows Chillingworth to uncover Dimmesdale's identity in secret.
Why Hester loves Dimmesdale is a mystery. But then I think Hawthorne believes that why people love people is a mystery anyway. Everybody knows people who love people whom they have no business loving. She's fallen in love, and being a woman, as Hawthorne imagines women to be, she loves him forever, regardless. I think another way to think about what she saw in him is that he is a kind of star or a celebrity in that little community. All the other ministers are older men. Here we've got a young man, very handsome as far as we can tell from Hawthorne's description. Everybody idolizes him.
For Hawthorne's Puritans, the Bible was the absolute authority, and the Bible said infidelity was an unforgivable sin. After all, the Lord punished biblical adulterers, David and Bathsheba, by causing the death of their son.
As biblical believers, the Puritans were keenly aware of the great adulterers in history. Hawthorne uses adultery to stand for the more general sinfulness of the human heart. It was an especially egregious sin because it violated not only the marriage relationship, but also the social covenant. Marriage is something that is done in the eyes of the state.
Hester is now excluded from society. She lives on the outskirts of town with Pearl and makes her living as a seamstress. Her fine embroidery work is in great demand by the community, which holds her in contempt. The town magistrates keep her busy with orders for every special occasion, except weddings.
In this manner, Hester Prynne came to have a part to perform in the world. With her native energy of character and rare capacity, it could not entirely cast her off, although it had set a mark upon her, more intolerable to a woman's heart than that which branded the brow of Cain.
Hester Prynne's independent and rebellious attitude was not typical of Puritan women. She may have reflected changes taking place during Hawthorne's lifetime. In the 1850s, women began cautiously pushing for their right to education. And for the first time, they started campaigning to limit the legal control of husbands over wives. Margaret Fuller was a transcendentalist colleague of Hawthorne's, who wrote America's first feminist treatise. She became a mentor to women who would lead the abolitionist and suffragist movements. Hawthorne's Hester was a woman ahead of her time. Almost.
So what happens is he creates a radical woman character who confronts the town by virtue of her femaleness. That's her sexuality, which is very important. He takes her to a certain point, and then he will not allow her to act. She can't run away. She can't really confront the town. The only way she can do these things is by accepting the town's version of her and being that person to perfection.
As the years go by, Hester's illegitimate child grows into a lively, independent little girl. Pearl is a passionate and disturbingly perceptive child. Hester cannot control her.
Pearl starts as a kind of obsession herself, a walking symbol of the Scarlet Letter, she's called at one place. In another place, she's seen as if she were a kind of embodiment of her parents' passion, her parents' sin.
This child is completely outside the law and symbolizes, if you will, what it is to be outside of society entirely.
The community's isolation of the pair leaves Hester as Pearl's only companion. They sometimes go on walks in the forest, where Pearl incessantly questions her mother about the Scarlet Letter and the identity of her father.
Pearl is defined throughout the novel as a sort of imp child. At times she's talked about as the sort of, her father being the black man of the forest, the devil. That part of her character functions in the novel to associate a sort of evil and Puritan culture with the forest, with the unknown that the forest represents, the forest being the place they associate with a lack of social order. So the devil is often associated with the forest.
Satan was very real for the Puritans. The devil was present and at work. This is why witchcraft was so feared. Then, as now, there actually were people who practiced magic and witchcraft, but they punished it because they believed that it was really, really true, that you could hurt people by witchcraft. They believed that the devil was at work trying to bring us down.
Pearl's insolence provokes the town magistrates to suggest that the child be taken away from her mother. Hester goes to the governor's mansion to defend herself.
There were rumors spread around by people who had trouble with the whole idea of an anomaly, like a single parent raising a child on the outskirts of town. They thought that she was an unfit mother because she had committed this sexual crime and would not confess who the father was. That was really the key to it, that she held back from telling the full truth about the situation.
Hester finds the governor, Chillingworth, and the Reverend Dimsdale in conversation when she enters the governor's house. The governor asks Pearl where she comes from, to test her knowledge of her catechism.
Pearl knows the answer perfectly well, but she is being her impish self. The role of Pearl in the story, in a way, is to disrupt. She's a great disruptor. Children are great disruptors anyway, but she is the disruptor extraordinaire. She gives what she knows is a perverse answer. She puts her finger in her mouth and she says, "Well, no one made me," or "My mother plucked me from the rose bush by the prison door." This is an answer that is calculated to bring the ire or the displeasure, the disapproval of her elders.
Mr. Prynne, there has been much question concerning you lately. The point has been discussed whether we, who are charged to monitor and instruct our flocks in Christian principles, do well to trust the soul of your child to the guidance of one who has stumbled and fallen into the pit of sin. Would it not be better if she were taken from your charge and instructed in the truths of heaven and earth?
No, I will not lose the child. Speak for me. You were my pastor and had charge of my soul and know me better than these men can.
There is truth in what she says. This child of its father's guilt and its mother's shame works in many ways upon her heart. It was meant for a blessing, the one blessing she has. It was meant for a retribution, too, a torture to be felt, a constant reminder in the midst of a troubled joy.
Reverend Dimsdale's speech convinces the governor to leave Pearl in Hester's care. But it also arouses Chillingworth's suspicions about the preacher. As Hester and Pearl head for home, they are stopped by the governor's sister, Mistress Hibbins, who is rumored to be a witch.
A witch in New England had multiple meanings. Pride was the ultimate sin of witches, but there were a number of others that the Puritan magistrates and ministers associated with witchcraft. This idea of a witch as a discontented and angry woman, or the idea of a witch as a seductive woman, or as an envious or malicious woman.
Wilt thou go with us tonight? There will be a merry company in the forest, and I promise the man in black that Hester Prynne should attend.
Please make my excuse to him. I must stay at home and keep watch over my little Pearl. Had they taken her from me, I would willingly have gone with you into the forest.
What Hibbins is doing is trying to lure her into witchcraft. She's suggesting that she has every reason to become a witch. I mean, she has plenty of reason to be discontented and angry and vengeful. But Hawthorne keeps her from that. I mean, she does not become that kind of figure. She's never bitter. She may be strong, she may be outspoken, but she never becomes the kind of discontented and angry woman that Puritans most associated with witchcraft.
Puritan society was the ideal setting for accusations of sorcery and black magic. Their religion taught that the devil was always on the attack. The Puritans lived in villages surrounded by wilderness. They were terrified of the forest and the Indians who lived there. It was the unknown, where the forces of darkness lay waiting.
The settlers were nervous about their physical well-being, and that made them fearful. They were very, very nervous, too, about the honesty of their own religious and political philosophy. They wanted it to be honest, and they wanted to believe it. But they also suffered from a sense that it may not have been true. Because they saw in their own lives that they couldn't live up to it, that didn't make them any less fearful of it. But since they believed that they had to be perfect, they had to displace all their fear onto something else, because they couldn't really cope with the terror of saying, it's me. So everything was externalized. So if I felt desire for you as a man, and you were a woman, I externalized that desire, and I blamed you for exciting it in me, and said that you had put it into me by an act of witchcraft.
A memorial to those executed during the Salem witch trials is testament to the Puritans' radical fear of citizens they perceived as threatening.
Never again the burning. Never again.
The legacy of Puritan persecution lives on today. Every Halloween night on Gallows Hill in Salem, a group of modern-day witches pay homage to past victims in the hope that the days of witch hunting are gone forever.
Part of this wheel of life.
and we honor those who come before us. We honor those who died for our freedom.
Although women most often were accused of being witches, anyone behaving strangely was suspect.
Chillingworth crosses the line constantly between being a witch figure and being the devil himself. I mean, he is the black man at times in this novel, but he's also someone who is portrayed as having made a pact with the devil.
Dimmesdale is growing very frail, and Chillingworth suspects the cause of his weakness is a guilty conscience. He moves in with the preacher and tortures Dimmesdale by the power of suggestion, starting discussions about hypocrisy and its terrible consequences. As Chillingworth preys on Dimmesdale, Pearl torments Hester. The child's love of mischief and disrespect for authority are a constant reminder of her illegitimate birth. Even Pearl's name, a reference to the biblical pearl of great price, reminds Hester of her own sin of passion.
In contrast to Pearl, we have the husband of Hester who attaches himself to Dimmesdale and becomes something like his conscience. And you could say that whereas Pearl symbolizes the absence of law, Chillingworth becomes law without any mercy at all. He haunts the minister. He tortures the minister.
The affair of Hester and Dimmesdale creates an obsession for him. He becomes hooked on the obsession, and it destroys him.
One night, Chillingworth enters the bedroom of the sleeping preacher and exposes a horrifying sight on Dimmesdale's chest.
I believe what Hawthorne intends there is that Dimmesdale had inflicted a brand upon himself, branding himself with a hot iron with the letter A, so that he, in fact, had the same brand that Hester did.
Despite his constant suffering, Dimmesdale remains unable to confess his sin publicly. He whips himself, fasts, and prays endlessly in a desperate search for redemption.
He becomes increasingly certain that what he did was wrong and that he deserves to be punished for it, but at the same time, believing as he does in the law, he's afraid to confess to what he's done because then he will be punished, then he will lose the status that he depends on.
Dimmesdale's guilt sinks him deeper into despair, and he turns to his faith for salvation. The minister's preaching seems unusually inspired.
Arthur Dimmesdale is presented as a preacher with a sweet and broken voice, and it vibrated in the human heart. Dimmesdale has, ironically, even more power as a minister because of his brokenness. As he mounted the steps of the pulpit and that rich voice lofted out over the congregation, hearts were moved. And even as he expressed his own brokenness and yearned to confess it all before the congregation, they read it as simply an expression of his deep piety.
The people knew not the power that moved them thus. They deemed the young clergyman a miracle of holiness. They fancied him the mouthpiece of heaven's messages of wisdom and rebuke and love. In their eyes, the very ground on which he trod was sanctified.
As the minister delivers dramatic sermons, Hester quietly spends her time tending to the sick and needy of the village. The community which judged her so harshly benefits from her generosity of spirit.
She, increasingly through the course of the novel, becomes more and more like the ideal Puritan woman in a number of ways, not totally, but she becomes deeply concerned with the sort of good of the community. I mean, she becomes a kind of nurse figure. But throughout the novel, she is still a sort of symbol of that sin that she committed before the novel begins.
7 years after Pearl's birth, Reverend Dimsdale's hypocrisy finally overwhelms him. He is filled with self-hatred. One night he goes to the marketplace and mounts the steps of the scaffold, where Hester first stood in penance.
Dimsdale believed, along with all Puritans, that the ministry of the Word of God and the office of the minister was itself a means of grace, so that in spite of his sinfulness, he still prayed that he would be the channel of God's blessing to the people, and that it would be better for him to continue, even in hypocrisy, that God could still use him.
Hester and Pearl are walking home when they come upon the suffering minister. Dimsdale and Hester are linked by Pearl, the product of their love and the symbol of their sin.
Climbing onto the scaffold in the middle of the night is another form of pretending to confess, but not really confessing. In terms of the plot, it happens that Hester and Pearl are walking along the street, and it happens that they see him. It happens that she climbs up to talk to him, and at that moment she sees how he has deteriorated in the course of the several years that they haven't really had much to do with one another.
Suddenly, a meteor races across the sky. To Dimsdale, it appears to write the letter A.
Well, what's psychologically going on is that he's in deep distress about the false position that he's been living. And so he gets up at night, not in the daytime, but at night on the scaffold, and simulates confession. That's the psychological reality. The symbolic reality is that Scarlet A up there in the sky, that in his fantasy he sees as an explanation of his own condition.
Puritans believed in portents. They believed that God would communicate through things like earthquakes and meteors. They believed that when a momentous event was taking place or about to take place, that there were natural events with supernatural messages behind them.
Typical of Victorian literature, objects become symbols to convey meaning between the lines. The prison and the cemetery suggest repression and sorrow. The forest symbolizes freedom in the sunlight and evil in the darkness. And of course, the Scarlet Letter permeates everything.
The entire community becomes symbolic. If Hester comes to symbolize the individual who is self-motivated, and Dimsdale comes to symbolize conformity, the Puritans come to symbolize community and the whole question of how much law a community needs and how much freedom individuals can have within a community. You get a symbolic setup in the interaction of the characters.
Later, after Hester and Pearl stand with Dimsdale on the scaffold, Hester resolves to ease the preacher's suffering. She seeks out Chillingworth to end her pledge of secrecy to the vengeful old man.
Haven't you tortured him enough?
No. No, look at me. I have become a fiend. You said so yourself. And it is he who has made me so.
I cannot bear it, nor the falsehood in which I have engaged these years. For his sake and for mine, I must reveal the secret.
Woman, I could pity you. Perhaps, had you met earlier with a better love than mine, all this evil would not have happened. I pity you for the good that has been wasted in your nature.
And I you, for the hatred that has transformed a wise and just man into a fiend. Will you not release it and be human again? There may yet be good for you, since you have been deeply wronged and are able to pardon.
Peace, Hester. I cannot pardon. It is our fate. Oh, go your way and deal as you will with that wretched man.
Chillingworth takes upon himself the role of God. He puts these people through hell and becomes, in his own mind, the agent of God. His sin is perhaps the worst. But in another way, before God, all sins are the same. They're of equal weight because they destroy the soul. They kill. Sin kills human life, and it destroys each character in the story. So from that point of view, for each of them, their own sin is the worst.
A turning point is reached when Hester meets the tormented minister in the forest. The gloom of the wilderness mirrors Hester's apprehension and despair.
Hester tells him that the man he is living with, whom he has thought of as a friend and a counselor, is in fact her husband, his greatest enemy. He is horrified. He says, "Oh my God, Hester, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?" She says to him, "Leave." Now, this would be very good advice for certain kinds of people, but it is a very bad piece of advice for Dimmesdale, given who he is. She says, "Forget these people. You don't have anything to do with them." He says, "Oh, but I can't go by myself." She says, "All right, I'll go with you." And we've got this moment of possibility where everything is going to be wonderful.
Hester is relieved by the thought of leaving Boston. The once foreboding forest becomes a symbol of freedom. When Hester discards her letter, she becomes radiant with happiness, and sunshine breaks through the darkness.
He's wonderfully complex, Hawthorne. You know, you can feel it in him, and you can feel it in the writing. There's a passage where he talks about Hester's response to Arthur when Arthur comes in the forest and she realizes that Arthur does actually love her. And he talks about her skin tones changing and when she lets her hair down. This is a man who loves women. I mean, he's seen this. He's written about something that he's seen.
Hester calls to Pearl, who has been playing in the woods. The sight of her mother without her letter upsets the headstrong child. Pearl's reaction reminds Hester that the Scarlet Letter is an inescapable part of her past. In an attempt to win Pearl's friendship, Dimmesdale kisses her, but she runs to a nearby brook and washes his kiss away. Pearl despises her parents' secrecy.
Pearl says that she wants Dimmesdale to say that he's her father in public. Otherwise, I think the implication is she won't believe that he really means it. And she's right.
Returning to town, Dimmesdale finds the world dramatically changed. The decision to run away has left the minister in a state of feverish excitement.
When Dimmesdale leaves the forest, he now has thrown off the yoke of the law, and being basically a conformist, he doesn't know what to do with himself. He immediately gets all kinds of crazy ideas. He wants to blaspheme and tell dirty jokes to little boys. He wants to tell an old woman that there's no afterlife. He just wants to do all these bad things. It's as though a man or a person who believes in the law, then, of course, when you break the law, you have to believe that you're a very bad person. And this is exactly what has happened.
It is election day for the Puritan magistrates, and there is great activity in the center of town. Hester, Dimmesdale, and Pearl are to leave Boston secretly that night on a ship sailing for England.
It's a story about freedom. There is not much freedom in the story, but there's the yearning for freedom. There is the dream of freedom. There's the question, how do we find freedom?
Marion, how much is that pardon long on that?
All Hester's dreams are shattered when the ship's captain tells her that Chillingworth is joining them on their voyage. She quickly moves to warn Dimmesdale. But before she has a chance, he climbs the scaffold. Dimmesdale tells Hester that he is dying and must acknowledge his shame. He turns to the crowd and cries out his guilt.
The sun, but little past its meridian, shone down upon the clergyman and gave a distinctness to his figure as he stood out from all the earth to put in his plea of guilty at the bar of eternal justice.
Dimmesdale confesses because he is too deeply the Puritan to change his identity. In his frame of reference, the only way to live out his destiny is to be who he is in relation to the Puritan community. In other words, to live out his destiny as a minister. And that means to disclose his secret and take what follows.
At the end of his confession, Dimmesdale reveals his chest to the horrified crowd as proof of his sin.
At the end of Scarlet Letter, after Arthur's sermon, Hawthorne's very interesting. He can't bring himself quite to say that everybody got the same message. What he says is, people saw this in all sorts of different ways, and they didn't really know what to make of it, and they were kind of a bit discombobulated and confused by all this. They didn't know whether there was an A, they didn't know whether there wasn't, they didn't know whether they'd heard what he said or not.
Finally cleansed of his guilty conscience, his family reunited, Dimmesdale dies. He throws himself on God's mercy, abandoning Hester and Pearl.
Hester, at the end of the story, still wants Arthur as they share that moment in the magic circle in the forest. She has a new future, a different future in mind. And even when Arthur goes onto the scaffold at the very end, she still is yearning for him and believes that perhaps they'll be together in heaven. So has she repented? Has the Scarlet Letter done its office? I have my doubts, and so does Arthur. He says, I fear, I fear. Think about it, Hester, he says. Think about our sin. Repentance is the way. That's the Puritan answer. Arthur's a good Puritan until the end.
Hawthorne then tells us what happened to those Dimmesdale left behind. Chillingworth dies within a year, willing Pearl an inheritance. Hester and Pearl leave the country. But years later, Hester returns to live in the village, still wearing her Scarlet Letter.
For me, the great false note in Hester's character at the end is that Hester stays on in the town, puts off everything that she's believed in the hopes that this will come to Pearl, and lives as a kind of grey eminence who earns the respect of the town. That, for me, is totally out of character.
Hester's return to the village, after she has spent her entire life as an outcast, is a frustrating ending for many readers of the Scarlet Letter. We are left wondering where Hawthorne stands. He refuses to supply a moral for his story.
One's desire to have the story come out in a certain way is a form of introjecting what Hester wants. So we are feeling what Hester feels, and we desire the story to come out in a certain way, and we are disappointed perhaps for her when it doesn't come out the way she wants it to come out.
When she dies of old age, Hester is buried next to Dimmesdale under a single tombstone. The letter A is engraved in the slate.
Hawthorne wanted to dramatize in one book both the claims of the individual against society and the state, and the claims of society on the individual. And so he created a kind of paradox and expressed it in narrative form. And that's the book as we have it. And I think undoubtedly helps account for the book's endurance as a classic.
In the end, who was right about Hester and Dimmesdale's sin of passion doesn't matter. There are far greater evils than adultery or bearing an illegitimate child, like hypocrisy or vengeance. And certainly there are also punishments more terrible than a scarlet letter.